Darius I, king of Persia, loved to play in the company of his soldiers and his horses. During the last century, the British living in India discovered polo, a game played in the village squares there. The considerable efforts demanded of the horses and the courage they showed impressed army officers and moved the public in Europe. Practiced today by a few thousand horsemen in various countries, polo is one of the oldest sports in the world. "2,500 years after Darius, men are still playing and horses are still essential to their sport." How long have horses been exerting their fascination on human beings? This fascination was so strong in Prince Louis-Henri de Bourbon that he was convinced he would be reincarnated as a horse. So convinced was he that he had the most magnificent stables built, the like of which had never been seen before or since. He hoped in this way to live his new life in the luxurious style to which he was accustomed. Nobody knows if his dream ever came true and he returned to live in those magnificent stables. Perhaps it's not too late, for this sumptuous setting is the home today of the living museum of the horse. The very existence of a museum says a lot about the place occupied by the animal today. Barely 2 centuries after the prince's dream, the horse has become a museum piece. It's true that the museum is a living one. Every day, riders and horses demonstrate the affectionate bond that unites them in the displays and shows they put on. The relationship between man and beast is a disconcerting one. Here we associate the animal directly with death, there with the world of dreams, casting him, as our fancy takes us, as a bird, a unicorn, a centaur, or a hippogriff. Light and fleet of foot, the horse is attractive and yet inaccessible. As inaccessible as the sun in its course across the heavens with which numerous civilizations have associated it. On Midsummer's Day, the Feast of St. John, it's traditional in the marshlands of Camargue for horses to tread on fire, symbolizing the decline of the sun from that moment on. It's also a purification rite for horse and rider, no doubt a variation on the Celtic feast of Beltane, when livestock was herded over the flames to stave off disease. The Celts also worshipped a horse goddess, Epona. In her honour they carved images of their idol on the chalk hills of England. At Westbury, the horse was originally drawn with a crescent-shaped tail, pointing upwards as a sign of fertility. It was also a good luck charm, like the horseshoe today. In the 18th century, the landowner decided to alter the design, and the image we're left with today has lost the essence of its symbolism. Just the whiteness of the chalk remains, surprising the traveller with its milky brightness amidst the greenery. The whiteness of the horses in Camargue also symbolizes the purity of the gods, and yet the reason behind their white coats is anything but godly. On the contrary, it could hardly be more down to earth. It would appear that the mosquitoes and horseflies that proliferate here in the month of May are more attracted to dark-robed animals. The white robe the horses of Camargue have developed over the centuries is merely a defense against this local nuisance factor. For the cattle breeders, the horse is the only way to move around the marshes. It's also a priceless helper when it comes to sorting the bulls. The contrast of colour with the black-coated beasts only heightens its splendour when the moment of confrontation arrives. With incomparable agility, obeying the discreet commands of the rider, the horse slips in amongst the herd and coaxes the chosen bull out into the open. The scene puts one in mind of the angel of evil cast out of heaven. Yes, indeed, the horse plays a role in almost every religion. In the Christian tradition, it's mentioned in the scriptures on momentous occasions. This mural, which is almost 1,000 years old, depicts the end of time as predicted in the passage on the Apocalypse in the book of Revelations. One of the horses carries, "He that was faithful and true." For his return to glory, he's surrounded by a host of angels mounted on white horses. The presence of the horse is most decisive, however, in the Islamic religion. When the Prophet Muhammad set out to preach belief in a single God, he surrounded himself with horsemen to drive his teachings home. In the different combats that ensured, the tribes that rode Arabian horses performed great feats. They were the spearhead of the spread of Islam. For them, the white steed was created by Allah from a handful of the south wind. He said, "Your name will be Arab. Bravery will be tied to the hair of your forelock. I have preferred you among all the beasts of burden, and I have made of your master your friend. I have given you the power to fly without wings, in attack as in retreat." The origins of the Arabian breed of horse aren't very clear. It would appear to have come from the Middle East, and to have changed through contact with the desert tribes. The endurance it's built up is a remarkable example of how animals adapt to their environment. The breeders therefore try to perpetuate the race by using the purest specimens possible for reproduction. In Islamic countries, this is a religious act. In his day, the Prophet also insisted that care be taken with their breeding and their reproduction. He said that whoever owned an Arabian horse and honored it would in his turn be honored by God. But not every horse in Morocco enjoys the same standard of living as the thoroughbreds in the royal stables. At the animal market you can find all sorts of crossbreeds of Arabian horses and barbs. To make the best possible impression, the horses have to hold their heads up high. The unlucky ones will be sold for harnessing to the collective taxis, where they'll wait to take their passengers home after the market, however many there may be. Eager to make as much money as possible out of the ride, the drivers are loath to turn down a few extra passengers. The finest horses at the souk, on the other hand, will end up performing in a fantasia. The tradition of the Islamic horseman is perpetuated in religious celebrations called Musam. The fantasia in which the horses are used is an exercise inherited from the past. A symbolic replay of the tactics used by the mounted warriors of yore. The secret lay in the element of surprise. They galloped straight at their target, struck hard, and disappeared again before the enemy could riposte. wave after wave of horsemen must gallop, stop and shoot in perfect synchrony. The design of the Arab bridle stops the horses dead in their tracks, which together with their speed is the secret of the efficacy of this type of attack. The crowned heads of Europe were aware of the quality of Arab steeds. Their armies had learnt it at their cost. In the 17th century, the English, who were increasingly fond of horse racing, wanted to increase the speed of their racers. Princely marriages were arranged, and the finest mares in the land were also selected to receive the attentions of foreign studs specially shipped to England. 3 Arab steeds were thus selected to sire that most aristocratic of breeds, the English thoroughbred, from which noble lineage the princes of the racetracks have sprung. Their stud book, or family tree, carefully retraces the history of the breed over 3 centuries in the most minute detail. With these thoroughbreds, the technique of inbreeding was invented. The idea is to strengthen the characteristic features of a breed by allowing no reproduction other than with horses of the same race, or between members of the same family, so to speak. This is how high-level athletes are bred, in the hope that they'll one day be champions. The residents at the Newmarket National Stud Farm, 70 miles from London, are of that noble caste. Everything is done for their well-being. The names of their ancestors for up to 5 generations are proudly displayed like decorations and coats of arms on the doors of their boxes. Some of those ancestors still watch over them from their graves nearby, discreetly visited by admirers who decorate their tombs with flowers. In view of the importance of a horse's origins, one can almost understand why a single covering by the finest studs can cost as much as $200,000. Whenever there's talk of bloodstock, the figures inevitably soar. If man pays so much attention to the horse, it's not necessarily out of the goodness of his heart. The pick of the bunch have a heavy responsibility towards their owners, for they can make or break them. The real wager begins at Deauville, at one of the great annual yearling auctions. Yearlings, as their name implies, are only 1 year old and have yet to prove their worth, but they may be future champions. A buyer who backs the right horse now will have a very profitable investment. The breeder doesn't yet know what price his young horse will fetch, so grooming is capital and goes on right to the last moment. Brushing, shining, some even go as far as to polish the horse's hooves. The clientele for yearlings is an international one. The United States, where horse racing is a real passion, has made some skillful acquisitions that have placed it among the world's leading breeders of thoroughbreds. The heart of the business is in Kentucky. At the Lexington Museum, in a very open setting, visitors are invited to peruse the already legendary history of the thoroughbred. They stroll through the gardens amidst the equestrian statues, and for once, there are no riders. For once, the horses themselves are the celebrities here, and not just props for more illustrious figures. At one end of the park, a memorial has been erected in honor of one of America's legendary steeds, Man o' War. Big, powerful and brave, he had all the qualities it takes to outclass the rest of the field. He'd come to symbolize the quality of American breeding. But other horses have a claim to fame in America. Nightmare, Yellow Fever, Brown Bomber are some of them. The names suggest a quite different kind of relationship with men, and sure enough, unlike racehorses, these animals are not mollycoddled. They're the stars of the rodeo season. The battle begins even before they get into the corral. The men who have to ride them know all their ins and outs. This one is violent, that one wily, and this one spins as he jumps, which is what the riders dread most. Already rebellious by nature, the horses are saddled with a girth fastened tight around their bellies to make them even more frisky.
And here we go. We have the whistle, and giving us an indication that the cowboy has made a ride. So let's thank the three cowboys on here are starting up the score. And sheet number 3, where the action is, where we have the big old Chevrolet pumpkin. Put that down again.
When you see these furies bucking frantically to throw off their riders in no time flat, in such a frenzy that they sometimes hurt themselves, you can imagine how hard it must have been for the first man who ever mounted a horse and rode it. Until that happened, horses weren't treated with much consideration at all. In the heart of the Beaujolais vineyards, Solutré is a well-known site because of the rocky outcrop that dominates the region. At its foot, a mass of horse bones were discovered, covering an area of 2 acres. They were leftovers from the hunting parties of a well-known ancestor of ours, Cro-Magnon man. He would wait for the horses to pass through the valley, then head them up against the wall of rock, where his accomplices would lie in waiting among the boulders armed with flint-tipped spears. This went on over a period of 25,000 years. Always migrating along the same trail, the horses were trapped in this spot time and time again. In all, more than 100,000 horses perished here. Traces of horse hunting are also found in the cave at Lascaux. 350 horse drawings line the walls. If you look closely at them, you'll find that horses weren't quite the same shape in those days. A few rare specimens still exist today. They're called Przewalski's horses. Przewalski was the name of the Russian officer who discovered them in Mongolia in 1876. Specimens were subsequently captured for zoos all over the world. Meanwhile, in the wild, the hunting went on until the species was virtually extinct.